My guest today is Danielle Wiebe. Now, Danielle is so many things. I mean, she is genuinely one of the nicest people I've ever had the pleasure of speaking with. She is a visionary entrepreneur, a podcaster with an extremely popular show. She's an expert on collaborations, and she's the founder of Business Babes Collective, which is a global community that supports and connects female entrepreneurs and leaders. Now, in this conversation, you'll hear Danielle and I talk about everything from what it's like to host in-person events and have to pivot during the pandemic to navigating new motherhood as you are a business owner. And what I found to be especially interesting and resonant was Danielle's journey of going through a little bit of an identity crisis, even as a successful business owner. And one of the hard costs that she shared with me, and you'll hear her get very transparent and candid about this, was that she really had identified herself publicly and personally as one thing. And then something happened that really required her to confront that identity and pivot and change. And the way that she did that with grace and also her approach to working with other people who are navigating uncertainty and changes in their own lives, it really, really gave me the chills and had me in my feels. And I think it will be the same for you. So enjoy my conversation with Danielle Wiebe. Danielle, welcome to Hard Costs.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so delighted that you accepted. I have to confess that I have been a fan of yours for much longer than I have been on your radar. And what really propelled me to reach out to you for this show was a collaboration. And so we share a mutual friend in Veronica Romney, who has been on this show. And I remember we were on a Zoom. Just, Veronica by nature is a super connector. And so I was in this room with all of these people that I had admired and really been following. You were in the room and I thought, well, here's the power of collaborations. Here's the power of network and referral marketing. I'm going to reach out and say, hey, can you and I be friends? So I would love to hear a little bit about you and kind of your origin story for what made you the business babe and boss that you are today.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, it's obviously a long story, but I'll try to give the cliff notes. I've been in entrepreneurship for a very long time. It's been, I think, almost like 11, 12 years now. And really, it started with this passion for people and for business. I always had kind of like a business, creative mind, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that. And so when I started studying and trying to figure out, okay, like what do I want to do kind of with the rest of my life, I tried a lot of different things. So I actually ended up starting a social media and web design company with a business partner. So we ran that for a couple of years while I was still studying. And then when I graduated, I had kind of, moved on from that business and just sort of in that zone of like, okay, what's next? And so I took a bunch of different jobs, and then that kind of propelled me into figuring out what are my passions, what are my strengths. And my family is very entrepreneurial. So my mom had her own business. My dad had a business as well. And then my sister had a wedding planning business. So I worked for her doing events and weddings. And then I worked for my mom's business. I would go to trade shows and she did international sales for electronics. So that was like a totally different industry. So just sort of hopped around. And then when I really realized like, okay, I do want to have my own business again, I just started networking like crazy. I would go to like tons of different events. I think at one point I was going to like one event per week and just trying to figure out like meet people, network, figure out what I wanted to do. And then I started my next business, and that was in the health and wellness space. And then I started realizing that there wasn't a ton of opportunity for young women like myself who were just kind of getting started in their businesses. There wasn't a ton of opportunity for us to connect and network with like-minded people. I found the people that I was networking with were like, 10, 20 years into business, like mostly like double or triple my age. And I just found like, I felt like it didn't belong, to be honest with you. And it always felt a little bit awkward, like walking into a room where I felt like, I feel like I shouldn't be here. So I decided that I wanted to host my own first pop up event. So I did that. And I think the first event that I had, we had like 10 people there. It was super chill. And then the people there were like, okay, well, like, when's your next one? I'm like, okay, I guess we'll host another event. And so I started hosting these little pop up events. And then that just snowballed into the business that now I run today, which back in 2017, 2018, we ended up actually launching into different chapters. So my local city is Vancouver. So we ended up launching a chapter in Seattle, in Victoria, in Toronto, and San Diego. And then the pandemic hit. So we had to just totally scrap the events. We had 80% of our revenue from the business coming from events. And that was obviously gone overnight. So then I realized, okay, we really have to hone in on building our online community. Because at the time we had Instagram, we had that kind of thing. But I hadn't really spent a ton of time, growing my email list or having any kind of another platform. So in that year, we started really focusing, honing in on growing that and started a podcast and grew that. And now we have a really awesome, amazing community of women, both online, and now we've brought back our in-person events. So we do education, we have mastermind groups, we have an online course, and then we're starting to do events again, which is super fun.
Oh my gosh. I love you. You talked about all these pivots, and I want to talk a little
Mhm.
bit more about that in just a moment. But you said something that really hit me where you felt this sense of not belonging. Was that the first
Mhm.
time in your life that you had had that particular feeling, or is that something you had experienced? I just love to know, like, what was young
Yeah.
Danielle like? It sounds like right now you're extroverted, you're a super connector. You have to sort of have that outgoing, magnetic personality to do what you're talking
Mm.
about. But is that true? Is that you? Or
It's
tell me
actually
more.
such a good question because I think about this a lot because as a child I was actually extremely shy, like extremely shy. And I remember um my mom would drop me off at daycare and I would like scream and cry. I did not want to be there. I just wanted to be with my mom. And then when she would leave, I would like cling on to the teacher. And like I did not want to hang out with any of the kids. I was
Yeah.
just so nervous and so yeah, shy around like other kids. And I remember, I think it was in kindergarten, my mom told me that she got back my report card, right? It's just basically, how are they doing? And what it said was, she's finally making friends. So it was like halfway through the year and I was finally making friends.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, I was like terribly shy as a kid. And I grew up with in a family, in a really large family. But I had two older sisters, and my sisters were 18 months apart. And then there's 5 years between my closest sister. So I always felt like the odd one out there too, right? Because I was like this annoying little kid, and my sisters were like best friends. And so, I would always be crying to my mom, like, oh, my sisters don't want to include me in anything and all this stuff, right? And so I think, yeah, like it's funny looking back because it's like, wow, you don't really realize that like the way that you grew up and different things. Because to me, community is everything. Like it's so, so important, and family is so important. And I remember learning, like, as I sort of grew up, and my sisters were telling me, we're all like very close now, of course, and they would always tell me like, you were so like emotional, like you felt things so deeply. And now that's like translated into like, you care so much about like other people, you like feel what they're feeling. And so I thought that was super interesting, just how that kind of like plays into our childhood, and what we experienced in our childhood, and like how that plays into who we are today. So yeah, thanks for asking me that question. I feel like I've never been asked that question before. So
I love that, and I think part of it is, so I moved around a lot as a kid. My father worked in the television business, and so he just naturally, his contracts would sort of come up every 2 years, and he'd go to a bigger city and a bigger city, and it was interesting because I was talking with Jordan Gill on this same show, and she had a similar experience. And what I have discovered is that, I mean, we all bring whatever it is from our childhood, whether it's
Mhm.
incredibly positive and wonderful or traumatic, but of course, it sort of points to, we always want to surround ourselves with people or create products that fill whatever it is that we wanted as a kid, not to get on my
Mhm.
therapy sandbox, soapbox,
Yeah.
but in hearing from someone like Jordan, or my own experience, where we naturally had to kind of cut through the noise and go make friends and be a little bit less afraid of what people were saying. I do find that people who didn't necessarily have that experience, understandably, have had to sort of create that
Mhm.
as they've gotten older. And I'll tell you, from
Yeah.
the outside looking in, everything you just said makes so much sense, because the care, and obviously I have a different perspective than you and your team would. You're trying to build it from
Mhm.
the inside out. But what I see is this incredibly inclusive, positive, affirming community where everyone is allowed in. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering, you must have heard pushback from people in your life, or people that are looking at what you do, saying, yeah, but what about competition? Why would I collaborate with
Mm.
someone who's doing the same thing I am? Why would I partner with somebody
Right.
who's going after the same audience as I am? What's your response to that type of feedback?
I really love this question because I think anything that we are excited or passionate about that we talk about is something that we've had to kind of like figure out ourselves. And I think that when I first got into business, because that's what I saw, exactly what you said. It was like people would only work together or like support each other or collaborate if they were the only person in that niche in that group. Like it was, and I would see all these networking groups too, and it was like, oh, you can only join if you're like the only person of with like this specific, I don't know, category of business. And that always felt really weird to me. It always felt a little bit like um because I always wanted to network with everybody. And I truly do believe that we all, like, there's no such thing as true competition, because no one is actually going to do what you do the exact way that you do it. And the only way that I think competition becomes um what I always tell people is that you can collaborate with people that are direct competitors to you as long as there's trust there and as long as there's shared values. So I'm not here to say like you have to go and collaborate with everyone. Like that would be kind of ridiculous, but if they share values and you respect them and you trust them and you have that relationship, then why not? Like those are probably the people that you're going to have the best conversations with. Those are probably the people that are super like-minded, or some you could do something together with them. Or even if you never do something together with them, like it doesn't matter. I think that we just have to be open to those opportunities, because if we live our lives or run our businesses in a way that's like, oh, that person's my competition, so I can't like, connect with her or collaborate with her because what if she steals my clients or whatever? Like, first of all, that's just not a fun way to live, number one. And then number two is it's just silly because I always think about it this way. And this is actually what I tell people in my community is that if someone, let's say you have a podcast and you have someone on your podcast that is literally a direct competitor. They do exactly the same thing as you do. You have a conversation with them, and someone listening to your podcast hires them instead of you. I always tell them they probably would have never hired you anyways. And that's like maybe a hard truth to hear, but it's one of those things where there's something about that other person that resonated with them and is just a better fit, and that's okay. Like it's okay to have someone else be a better fit for someone. And that's why I think too, like, I'm so, especially in our community as well, if someone, comes to our events and then they're going to other events as well, I'm like, that's awesome. Like, yes, you should go to this event. I'm telling them about all the other events that they should go to. And the same thing, like if there's members in our mastermind and then they're like, you know what, I feel like I need this like this other thing right now, and I feel like I need to put a pause on this. I'm like, great, like you do that. Like that, if that's what's pulling at your attention, if that's what's inspiring you right now, do that. Like I'm going to cheer you on. I'm going to support you whether or not you're like a client of mine or not.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. And so I think like if you can just have that abundant mentality, I talk about abundance a lot on my podcast, then you just will attract more to you just in, I don't know, just naturally as well. And people will be drawn to that. So, yeah, I think that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, I have absolutely found that abundance mindset and really like thinking of it as flexing a muscle. I have found so
Mm-hmm.
much value in that. And I definitely have felt, especially, my listeners know I went through a pretty severe period of burnout coming out of a corporate role and really had to like lead with trust. I had to trust the universe in saying, if
Mm-hmm.
I don't have scarcity mindset and if I trust that all these good things can happen despite kind of this negative experience that has just informed me, then yes, good things will happen. With that said, Danielle, you talked about all of
Mm-hmm.
these pivots that you've had to make. And I love the way you really stressed like the wins. We did
Mm-hmm.
this and then we did this. We did this and this happened and so we did this. And I think that speaks so much to the way that you must walk through the world of like how good could this be, right? But
Mm-hmm.
there have to have been moments where you really struggled with that abundance mindset. Were there times
Mm-hmm.
when you're watching the pandemic happen and you think, man, we're never going to recover? Or times when a launch or retention, like as a business owner, I just know that there
Yeah.
are these incredible peaks, but they all come with a valley. What are
Yeah.
some experiences like that you've had that have helped you become honestly a more well-rounded business owner?
Yes. Oh my goodness. So many moments. I think that, like, I think back to just my journey in general of, hosting all these events and like before 2020 happened, we had hosted over 100 events and collaborated with just like hundreds of businesses. And I think you become very good at like failing forward when you've hosted that many events. Like events are just such a wild thing where there's so much on the line, especially in-person events where there's overhead, there's different people that you're collaborating with. There's so much going on, and there's so many balls in the air, and because there's so many balls in the air, there's just so many more opportunities for some of those balls to drop. And so I think like through that, I got really good at overcoming like really hard things. That being said, obviously, I never would have ever imagined what would have happened in during the pandemic. And so definitely there were times where I was like, man, like, because at first, of course, everyone thought, okay, this is going to be 2 weeks. Okay, this is going to, so it kept being like, okay, no worries. Like, we'll push off our event. We'll just like reschedule. And then realizing like, we have to cancel everything and just like wait, which is because I'm a very controlling person as well, and I'm a planner, and I'm a very like can do person, but when I feel like I don't have options, that's obviously a very scary place to be. And so even though yes, there was so many opportunities that we could do online, it was always this like, okay, when can we get back to events, when can we get back to events? And it was this like, oh my goodness, like we're not going back to events for a very long time. And I think that was the hardest thing because I had kind of, if I'm completely honest with you, I had really a lot of my identity wrapped up in my work. And I had a lot of, I was the person who hosted these epic events, and that's how people knew me. And I think there was a lot of like work that I had to do on myself of, okay, I am not able to do in-person events right now. Like, who am I? Like, who am I other than a business owner? And really figuring out like being confident in who I am, even if everything were to disappear tomorrow and I wasn't a business owner. would I still be like happy with who I am and how I treat people and the friends that I have and family. And so I think that was a big turning point. And then in the fall of 2020, I found out we were pregnant with our first. And so we were obviously extremely excited, but I was also coming off of like a really big burnout because right when the pandemic happened, we're like, okay, let's do these like virtual events. So we basically did like back to back to back to back virtual events. We did this massive virtual conference where we actually like shipped out like VIP boxes. We did like all this stuff. And then after that event, I just had a huge like burnout period. And then we found out we were pregnant. And then I was like, okay, I need to figure like something needs to change here because, the world shuts down. Maybe that's a sign. Maybe God's trying to tell me that I should slow down. Oh, wait, no, I'm going to just like jump into something else and never slow down. And so I think that was just a big, like, I don't know, reality check of Danielle, you need to slow down and just like chill for a second. And so that I think that fall was one of the hardest, but then one of the most transformational times of my life, really, I think, because it forced me to just really figure out like, what do I want my life to look like first? And then figuring out, okay, how can I build a business that actually supports where like what I want my life to look like, instead of kind of the other way around, like fitting my life into what else is going on. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
More than it was, and you gave me chills because my children are older than yours, but I remember moving across the state. I left my full-time job. My side hustle had been going so well that I thought, well, now it's time to go all in. And then right at the same time found out I was pregnant with our second, and it was the same sort of like, oh wow. As you're making these pivotal decisions in your career,
Mm-hmm.
also here's this wonderful thing that you're going to be going through, but by the way, also you're going to be tired, you're going to have
Yeah.
heartburn, you're going to have all these things that
Yeah.
you need, this resiliency you may not have for your business, and it really does force you to put things in perspective. Now I would love to know, because you are somebody who is so much about community and collaboration, you have this wide net of people that you can speak with, but I can't imagine that you're bringing the highs and lows and the business decisions to that group. What does your inner circle look like when you find yourself thinking, do I do this or do I do this? Or like, hey, I just
Mm,
need to vent. Like this part of it is really
yeah.
hard. What does that inner circle look like?
That's such a good question. Well, I mean, I feel very lucky that one of my best friends, she actually started a business, probably like 4 years into me running my business too. And I remember like encouraging her so much to start a business because selfishly I was like, I want you to be an entrepreneur too, so that we can like talk about this stuff. And so that's really great. And we do a lot of like co-working together and stuff like that. But then also, like mentorship and getting coaching myself and just being a part of different communities has been really, really important to me. So that has always been something that, and also just in general, if I'm leading or if I'm coaching other people, then I need to have that coaching for myself as well, because I need to stay sharp so that I can then pour into these people, because you can't pour obviously from an empty cup. And so that's always been like a huge thing for me, whether it be being a part of a group program or a mastermind, or just getting one-on-one coaching or taking courses. Like I'm always trying to learn new things and I think now it's less about I'm still learning new things, but it's more about, okay, how can I get people in my life that I really admire? And whether that be peer relationships, where I feel like, I can pour into them, they can pour into me the same way. So those kind of friendships have been game changing, but then also coaching where I feel like, okay, I just need to like ask this person a bunch of questions and I need them to give me feedback on my business. So, yeah, all of it. Like, I don't know if that answers your questions, but I feel like I try to, as much as I can, surround myself with community that inspires me, that challenges me, and that also, like you said, I can just vent to when I need to.
Yeah. No, I love that. And that last one, I think that when I was going through burnout, I had not given myself those tools. Either it was talking
Mm,
to people who were like in the trenches with me, which is great for like moaning and whining and like feeling not
mhm,
alone in that problem area, but it doesn't do a lot for figuring out how to get out. And
mhm,
when I left that experience, I gave myself all the tools, therapy, really figuring out like, where is my mastermind, where are my coaches, and then other
mhm,
things that are much less strategic, but are still powerful. Like, for example, it's such a silly thing, but it seems to be resonating with other high achievers. My mother texts me every day and asks me if I've had lunch. And it is
mm,
because when I was coming out of this burnout experience, I realized that I had gotten into this pattern where I would skip lunch all day, every day.
mm.
And it was too busy. I couldn't take the time. Right. And what a silly
Right.
thing to not be able to take 20 minutes to get out of my seat and
Mm,
go nourish myself and breathe. And so I made this commitment to myself and then also publicly, hey, if I ever start to feel like on a consistent basis, I can't do basic things like take a walk, pick my
mhm,
kids up at school, say no to meetings on Fridays. Like I've now, like you said, gotten to the point
mm,
where I'm trying to fit my stuff into my business and not the opposite. Um, but I'm wondering, you talked about this, I think very understandable slide into burnout when you had this acute challenge where you're doing these events on top of events. Is there anything
mhm,
right now in your life that you think this is a deal breaker? Like I have to work out in the morning. I need to end work by a certain time to be with my kids. What are some of those
mm.
non-obvious tools that have helped you avoid slipping back into burnout?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think a big one for me is like checking in with myself and then having other people check in on you. Like, I love that you said your mom texts you. That's so sweet. Like, we had lunch today. But like, I check in often with my husband too. And it's like, okay, how are you doing? Okay, how are you doing? It's like, but like, how are you really doing? And I think it's like being honest with, I think I used to, it sounds weird saying this, but like I feel like I used to like lie to myself even of like, oh no, like I'm not working too much or like I'm not like I used to just sort of like play it off and then I'm like that's not serving me. Like just pretending that I'm doing okay or that like working certain hours. And I think so much has changed too since I had kids, obviously.
Mhm.
You just have less time for work really, and
Mhm.
I think that has been such a benefit too because I've learned so much through that in what is actually the important things, and then also like what do I enjoy doing, like what actually lights me up, what are
Mhm.
the things that I'm doing that I feel like I'm doing it because I feel like I have to. Do I really have to? Like, do I? Because you don't really have to do anything. So, really figuring out like what are those key things. And yeah, maybe there's some things that you don't love doing that maybe you have to do for a season because maybe you can't afford to be outsourcing it right now, or, taxes need to be done, obviously. But, then having a plan of, for me, it was okay, I realized that anything tax related, anything bookkeeping related, just really, it was like a dark black cloud over my head always. So I'm like, this is something I need to outsource because I need to know someone else has got this. And that doesn't mean that like I'm not checking like my bank accounts and that I'm
Mhm.
not like, checking on things, but at least I know that's taken care of. I can go to someone, say, okay, what's going on here? And that was something that I was trying to do on my own before to keep my business lean, but it was crushing my creativity. It was all of these things. And so it's really like, okay, letting go of the things you need to let go of, and then making space for things that really like light you up and give you energy. Um And I think that's what like my biggest learnings have been over the past couple of years is what truly do I want to be doing long term and what kind of things excite me and light me up, and then saying no to things that I don't have capacity for in this season, and trying not to feel guilty about it. I'd be lying if I say sometimes I don't feel like, oh, but I really want to help that person out, or I really want to be a part of this thing. It's sometimes really hard to say no. So I'm aware of that too. Right now, I don't have any kind of a strict routine. I mean, I have a 4 month old and a 2 and almost a half year old. So routines are very flexible. Let's just say that
I
right now.
totally understand that.
Yeah, but I will say that, as long as I feel like, okay, I've gotten a couple hours of like, stuff I've got to do for the business done. I feel like I've been present with my kids. I'm, like you said, I'm nourishing myself. I'm eating, I'm drinking. And then, yeah, at the end of the day, it's like checking in and checking in with myself or checking in with my husband and saying, how are you doing? And then making changes if it's not working. So I think it's like, being okay with, you might have a plan of this is how I think things are going to go, but often you have to adjust the plan. And right now we're finding like we have to adjust the plan sometimes weekly because our kids are so little. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's especially helpful to hear you share that. I know that many of the listeners here are either working for someone else, but really like they're very ambitious and they're trying to figure out how do I continue to perform and show up at work while still really honoring this family that I created and that I wanted and that serves me, or they're working for themselves. And I find sometimes that's an even more slippery slope because, especially for those of us who work from home, like your office is your kitchen, your office is the kids' playroom. And
Mm-hmm.
so, really, I love what you just shared about being flexible. And I
Yeah.
think being forgiving of yourself too when things don't necessarily happen. I mean, working asynchronous hours has been really helpful to me. I am such a type A that yes, I want to get all of it done within this parameter. But, if I need to get up and do 10 minutes of work on a Saturday because it empowered me to go watch my kids play softball for a few hours the night before,
Mm-hmm.
like that's great. Yeah. And I think just like releasing this sort of like, this is what a good CEO looks like. This is what a good founder
Yeah.
operates like has been
So good.
helpful, but your kids certainly force you to make those adjustments. So I'm glad that you shared that.
I love that, and I want to actually say something to this because this is something that we literally did this for the first time yesterday, and my husband and I are like, oh my gosh, we should do this every week. It was Wednesday at 12 p.m. Because we get care for our kids 4 half days a week, and so we're like, why don't we just extend it a little bit and we can go for lunch together? And so we did like kind of a business meeting lunch in the middle of the week, and it was the best. And I was like, we could do this every week. Like, why not? Why can't we do this? And it was just kind of an exciting thing. And I think for anyone who has kids too, little kids, like getting that little bit of freedom where you can just go and like do something that like fills you up is so game
Yeah.
changing. And I love that you said, that it doesn't have to look like a perfect, CEO. Cause I think I used to always try to like, oh, well, what's that person doing? What's that person doing? Like, what does their schedule look like? What does their, like, when do they wake up? Or like, when do they go to sleep? Like, what's their exact morning routine? It's like, everyone is so different, kind of like we talked about before with collaborations. Like, everyone is so unique and so different that trying to do a morning routine just because you saw someone else do it that's successful or that you admire. Like you can take inspiration from it and maybe implement some of it for yourself, but it's not going to be exactly what you need to
Yes.
thrive. So it's like being creative and thinking like, well, what do I need, or like what is my unique personality that I can kind of create my schedule and my routines around what works for me right now. So I think like giving yourself permission to do that is really important. So yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I decided to go back into business for myself. So I had been running my own business. I went in house for 3 years with one of my clients. And then when I came out, I decided to go back into business for myself. And I remember, I mean, I have journals where I mapped out my plan, and it was going to be absolutely no more than 20 hours of work a week. And I figured everything out. I figured out my offer, my service model, everything within that framework. Well, guess what? I booked 20 hours a week. And then I didn't know what to do with myself. And I was
You were like,
craving the
I
work.
want to work more, but I'm not allowing myself to.
That's exactly it. And then I really had to come to this, aha moment for myself of, for me, and I love that that's helpful for people to say, I'm only working 10 hours, I'm 20 hours. But when I did that, I realized that that wasn't actually my motivation, like this arbitrary number. I really love to work. So it's, you were talking about it earlier. It's, if it gets to a point where I feel like I have to, or I'm having to make concessions in my personal life because of work, then that to me is the line. But I
For
actually feel
sure.
much better if I'm doing meaningful, exciting work and it is more than 20 hours a week, and really just understanding exactly what we were just saying, which is like, you're not a better or a worse founder or a CEO or a business leader if you operate within your own rules. You just have to like set and hold those, whatever that boundary is for yourself. And that was such a moment. I remember just feeling like, oh, I have to give myself permission to be somebody that works sometimes 40 hours a week, 40
Yeah.
amazing hours, meaningful. I love the work I'm doing. And that's okay, right? Like, you don't
Yeah.
have to be somebody that has some, but again, I love everything you're talking about people being so different, and really being like, I think the message is just figuring out what is going to work inside of your, dream life. And anytime you're pulled outside of that, then yes, be really hard on those boundaries and bring them back in. But if you love traveling for events, or you love being in collaborative communities, or whatever that looks like you do you.
Yeah, yeah. And it like in structuring like your career in a way, like your career or your business in a way that really allows you to thrive too. Because I know that like some people work really, really well in the mornings, and some people work really, they're more creative in the afternoons. And, knowing yourself, I think, is so important here because if you are trying to fit into this mold of, oh, well, all the successful people are waking up at 5 a.m. and they do their work block and then they do this, but then you're finding yourself like not being able, you like, you know, are barely awake by like, 10 a.m., then that's not going to work for you. Like sleep in and then work in the afternoon. That's fine. So yeah, I think it's just really figuring out
Yeah.
your unique like way of working because I just for so many years thought there was like one right way and one wrong way. And it's just this is just not the reality. So yeah,
No. And
I appreciate you saying that.
I
Yeah.
hope that people really heard what you said about like you having this moment where you felt like your identity had been wrapped up in this thing, whether it was by design
Mhm.
or not, and then you really having to adapt and be iterative with that identity. I love
Mhm.
that what you just said echoes that, where if somebody is feeling like, oh, Katy and Danielle are describing me like I'm outside of that, I'm not operating inside of this balance that I want. Well, guess what? Like you get to make the change. And there's no saying that
Mhm.
Danielle won't face that again, that I won't face that again. But I think just this understanding that everybody around us, and this is why I wanted to create the show, has experienced these hard costs, and really what you do
Mhm.
after them and what you learn from them, I think is the more interesting story.
Yeah.
So I'm going
Yeah.
to let you off
Totally.
with
Absolutely.
one more thing. Um,
Mhm.
so I come back to a particular mantra all the time, and it is a rising tide lifts all boats. That to me is
Mhm.
like especially resonant in a collaborative community like yours. And
Mhm.
it's when you were talking about your response to someone who might say, but what if it's my competition? No, a rising tide lifts all boats. Is there
Mhm.
anything, a mantra, a phrase, anything like that that you come back to when you have to recenter yourself or when you're going through a challenging time? Anything that really keeps you
Mm.
uplifted?
Oh, this is such a good question. I think for me, like, it's going to sound super cheesy, but it's like the golden rule, like, treat other people how you want to be treated. And also, I think never talk negatively about any other person, no matter what they've done, because um, it's just I think that there's this toxic idea out there that we need to like drop everyone in our life that isn't like
Mm,
inspiring us to be a better version of ourselves. And I really don't agree with that at all. I think that relationships are very dynamic. I think that um, through challenges that we have in our relationships actually grows us into better people. Um, and so, like, when it comes to the relationships in your life, whether it be your marriage or relationships with your family or friendships, it's like sometimes you have to do the hard work, and sometimes um, you there you can still have boundaries for sure, and boundaries are very, very important. But I also believe that sometimes walking with people as they're walking through challenges is one of the most like humbling, um, character changing things that you can do. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about community. It's not easy. Like, it's not this like, I think people think of community as this like fluffy thing where things are always going well. But when relationships are the best and the deepest, it's when you've gone through hard
mm,
things together. So, um, yeah, I don't know why I thought of that when you asked that question, but that was like the first thing that came to my mind because that's actually been on my mind a lot lately because I've seen a lot of things online that are I just
mm.
am like, oh, that idea is, in my
Yeah.
opinion, very toxic. And I think we need to get away from that because humans are valuable, and none of us are perfect.
Oh,
So we need to have a
preach.
little bit more grace, I think, for other people and for ourselves too. So
I
yeah.
love that. I don't think the golden rule is cheesy. I think it's a classic for a reason. And I think I love it's actually just a reminder to myself. I think often that hurt people if we're going to pull in another cliche. And when I
Mhm.
find myself operating from a defensive standpoint, I will say and think things that are like very reactionary. And I don't ever like that
Mhm.
about myself. And I am always wondering, like, what if somebody judged me on this one moment in my
Mhm.
life or this one thing or
Totally.
this highlight reel, right? That they saw, like,
Yeah.
what a great event we just kicked off. And then they don't know behind the scenes, like your event
Mhm.
planner didn't show up and the food wasn't good. And your swag
Yeah.
bags didn't arrive, like all these things. So I love that so much, Danielle. And I think that's the perfect way to leave the conversation. I'm so thankful
Mhm.
that you were willing to share your story and really
Aw, thanks.
thankful that you are doing what you do because this community certainly deserves your leadership. And like I said, I am such a big fan and if didn't even know it was possible, but I'm a bigger fan now after meeting you for real.
Aw.
So thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate you, and I appreciate so much that you asked me to be on this podcast. I always love conversations like this. So thank you for having me on, and I hope we can collaborate again soon.
So I mentioned Danielle's work at Business Babes Collective. I also told you that she is a wife, she's a mother of two, and she is passionate about teaching women how to build their own profitable and sustainable businesses that create time and financial freedom. Of course, you heard us talk about that on the episode. And I really want to encourage you to connect with Danielle on her social media platforms. And there are two places on Instagram, and I highly recommend that you follow both because they are both so vibrant and engaging and informative and interesting. The official Business Babes Collective account is at Business Babes Co, Business Babes Co. That's on Instagram. You can also follow Danny's personal stories at Danny Living Life, again on Instagram. Of course, you can find Danielle Wiebe on LinkedIn. You can follow and subscribe and listen to her Business Babes Collective podcast. The best way to find the links for that, by the way, is to go to businessbabescollective.com/podcast. There's also a Facebook group for female entrepreneurs, a lot of free resources, and so much more. And that is all at businessbabescollective.com. I hope you enjoyed getting to know Danielle and hearing her story, and especially hearing her perspective on collaboration over competition and the way that we all treat each other as we walk through the world. I loved this conversation, and I can't wait to bring you the next one on hard costs. Thanks for listening.